Hey guys, welcome to the 10th and final video in the SAT writing series. Today the topic is going to be just preparing for the test and going over pretty much anything I haven't covered already. So these last notes are just going to review miscellaneous writing problems, just different problems that you haven't seen before in these notes. So these aren't going to be too likely to be on your SAT, but it's still worth going over. And I'm just going to go over main strategies for taking the test and succeeding on your test day. The first type of question is graph interpretation. So you've probably seen these if you've done practice. They'll provide you like a graph or chart and pretty much ask you to choose an answer that contains accurate information from the graph to help support the passage. So these types of problems are also seen in the reading test, but they're just a little different for the writing test. So I'm going to go over these. So the answer is pretty much always the only choice that is factually correct, meaning out of the four answer choices, there's only going to be one that has like correct information from the graph or chart. So I don't really know how often this happens, but just in case that like two of the choices are factually correct, then you just choose the one that I guess best supports the main idea of the passage. So here's an example problem. It has long been known that the sea otters living along the west coast of North America help keep kelp forests in their habitat healthy and vital. They do this by feeding on sea urchins and other herbivorous invertebrates that graze voraciously on kelp. With sea otters to keep the population of sea urchins in check, kelp forests can flourish. In fact, the presence of sea otters for 2 years or less will completely eliminate sea urchins in a coastal area. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to notice like the main idea of this paragraph, and that's that kelp supports, I guess, a marine environment. If there are a lot of sea urchins, those eat the kelp, which is harmful for the environment. But if there are sea otters there, they eat the urchins, and that action keeps the kelp healthy and the environment healthy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this graph. So it shows no otters present for 2 years or less, and otters present for 10 years or more. And on this vertical axis, it shows the density of sea urchins in kelp. So sea urchins is going to be the dark bar, and kelp is going to be the gray bar. So if we just look at this, I'm going to see that if there are no otters present, there are more sea urchins than kelp. If otters are present for 2 years or less, all of a sudden the sea urchin population drops a lot, and the kelp density, I guess, rises a lot. And if sea otters are present for 10 years or more, then the urchins are completely gone, and the kelp density has gone up a lot, meaning the environment is healthy. So let's just look at all the choices to see which one's correct. So which choice offers an accurate interpretation of the data in the graph? A, no change. The presence of sea otters for 2 years or less will completely eliminate sea urchins. We can see that in the column where it says otters present for 2 years or less, they do a great job of reducing the urchin population, but they're not completely eliminated. So A is not correct. If we look at B, even 2 years or less of sea otter presence can reduce the sea urchin threat. We can see that's true because it does reduce the amount of sea urchins by a lot, and consequently helps the kelp population thrive. So B sounds correct. So we're just going to go with B for now. And if you check the other two choices, none of them are factually correct. So, or they don't really match with the graph. So B is the best choice. Okay, another type of question that I haven't really gone over before is modifier placement. So a modifier is just a word or phrase that describes or provides supplemental information to a noun. For these to make sense, the modifier must be placed next to the noun that it modifies, or else the sentence doesn't make sense. So, like, if an incorrect noun is placed between the modifier and the noun that it modifies, then it's just incorrect. So, it's pretty similar to a pronoun reference error, which I've went over in a previous week. But so often an error will occur when a modifier is placed next to a noun that is accidentally made possessive. So here's an example. Having returned from the ocean to the stream where it was born, an adult salmon's life cycle ends when it spawns and dies. So the modifier is having returned from the ocean to the stream where it was born. So this modifies an adult salmon, like the salmon itself. However, salmon is made possessive here. So it makes it seem as if the life cycle had returned from the ocean to the stream. So that's an error, and the way to correct it would just to be to make adult salmon non-possessive. So here's an example question. Generated by seasonal storms far off the coast, surfers highly praise the large, predictable sets of waves that are created by winter swells. So the modifier, the describing information, is generated by seasonal storms far off the coast. So we can kind of assume that this should be referring to either the winter swells or waves. So if we look at all the choices, the only one that places winter swells or waves right next to the modifier at the beginning of this underlined portion is B, because the shore isn't generated by seasonal storms, surfers aren't, and winter isn't either. So the best choice is B. One more type of question is conventional expressions. So these are just focusing on, just English phrases that you kind of hear or read. And yeah, the only way to actually answer these is to just choose the one that sounds right. So they'll focus on prepositions like to, for, from, stuff like that. So don't worry about all that. Here's an example, or here's a list of some standard expressions that you should know. Like if it's listing two things, it should be both this and that. For example, one common mistake is if people say like neither this or that. That's wrong. It should be neither and nor, or either and or. So one example is neither cats or dogs are my favorite. That's incorrect. The correct way to say to express this idea is neither cats nor dogs are my favorite. So yeah, questions like this are just gonna test your knowledge of these simple English phrases. So here's an example question here. Most lightning is unlikely at hitting the ground. Cloud to cloud bolts outnumber ground strikes by 3-1. So the best way to answer this question is to just choose one that sounds right. So most lightning is unlikely at hitting the ground. That sounds not correct. Most lightning is unlikely hitting the ground. That's wrong too. Most lightning is unlikely to hit the ground. That sounds right. And we'll just try D to make sure that we're not missing anything. Most lightning is unlikely from hitting the ground. So that doesn't make sense. So the best choice for this is C. It's just simply the one that sounds right. So by now I've covered pretty much most types of problems you'll see. So here's just some general tips for the test. So yeah, number one, just don't be nervous. It's just English. If you know how the language works, then you should be able to do just fine. One tip is don't spend too much time reading the passage because you don't really need reading comprehension for this. That's just the reading section. I think it's smart to get the main idea by skimming the passage first, but spend only like 1 or 2 minutes reading it. And then when you're answering specific questions, then you can do more specific, closer reading. So yeah, next is budget your time wisely. You have less than 9 minutes per passage. It's 35 minutes for 4 passages, which is just about 9. So yeah, just make sure you're keeping track of that. What I do is I'll move on after 9 minutes from a passage, even if I haven't answered it or answered all the questions, and I'll just come back later. But it's also okay to afford more time to like a passage um, that you just find more difficult or more time consuming to answer. Another tip that's very useful is choose the answer that is most correct. So I think this is more important on the reading test, but it still works on the writing test. Um, Often there will be more than one answer that can just stick out to you as correct. And a common mistake is people will choose the first one that they see that they know is correct. But they might be skipping over another choice that's, I guess, more correct, a better answer. So just look at every single answer. Just check all the choices and double check your work. So if you're coming back to a question, maybe you haven't answered it or you already did answer it, it's always worth coming back to with a different mindset because I can't really tell you how many times this has really helped me. When I took the SAT, I think like maybe 5 or 6 questions. If I didn't come back to, I would have gotten completely wrong. I was just able to see it differently, and yeah, get the right answer. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Hopefully you guys have a test date set up. I know a lot of things are canceled, so yeah. But just practice a lot and you'll do fine. So I do have some more additional practice questions and answers at the end. So thanks a lot for watching.